The slap echoed through Romano's steakhouse like a gunshot, and every patron turned to stare at the pregnant woman clutching her cheek. Rebecca Sullivan Thornfield sat frozen in her chair, 8 months pregnant and trembling as the sting of her husband's hand burned across her face. The elegant anniversary dinner she'd been dreading had just become her worst nightmare, played out in front of the city's elite at the most exclusive restaurant in town. "You stupid cow," Rick Thornfield hissed through his perfect smile, his voice low enough that only she could hear the venom. To everyone else, he probably looked like a concerned husband comforting his clumsy pregnant wife. "Can't you do anything right? 3 years of marriage and you still embarrass me like some trailer trash nobody." Becca's water glass lay shattered on the white tablecloth, soaking through the expensive fabric. She'd only been reaching for her purse when her swollen belly bumped the table. Such a small thing. Such a predictable reaction from the millionaire husband who controlled every aspect of her life. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words automatic after months of walking on eggshells. "I didn't mean to." "Shut up." Rick's hand moved toward her again, and she flinched so hard she nearly fell from her chair. "You're making a scene. Smile and act like the grateful wife you're supposed to be." Around them, the restaurant's other diners had returned to their conversations, but Becca could feel their sideways glances. She forced her lips into what she hoped passed for a smile, her hand instinctively moving to protect her unborn daughter. The baby seemed to sense her distress, kicking frantically against her ribs. Rick straightened his $5,000 suit and signaled the waiter with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never been told no. At 42, he was still handsome in the way that opened doors and silenced questions. His tech company had made him wealthy beyond imagination, and he wore that wealth like armor against consequences. "We'll need a new tablecloth," he said to the approaching server, his voice smooth as silk. "My wife is having a difficult pregnancy. You understand?" The waiter, a young man with kind eyes and military bearing, glanced between them with concern. Becca caught something in his expression, not judgment, but recognition, as if he'd seen this scene before. "Of course, sir. Are you sure your wife is all right? She's fine." Rick's tone could have cut glass. "Just clumsy. Aren't you, darling?" Becca nodded mutely, but the waiter's gaze lingered on her face. She wondered if the handprint was visible or if he was trained to spot the signs of domestic violence. Either way, his presence felt like a lifeline she couldn't reach. "Actually," the waiter said carefully, "I'm going to get our manager. He'll want to make sure everything is taken care of properly." Shockitri. Rick's jaw tightened, but he maintained his public facade. "That's not necessary." "I insist." The waiter's voice carried quiet authority. "I'll be right back." As he walked away, Rick grabbed Becca's wrist under the table, his fingers digging into her skin hard enough to leave bruises. "If you've embarrassed me in front of Tommy Richardson's staff, there will be consequences when we get home. Do you understand me?" Becca did understand. She understood that the man she'd married 3 years ago had been a carefully constructed lie. She understood that her dream of a happy family had become a prison of fear and isolation. Most of all, she understood that her baby deserved better than this. "Yes," she whispered, because agreeing was easier than fighting. It always was. Rick released her wrist and picked up his wine glass, studying the vintage as if nothing had happened. "You know, Becca, sometimes I think you do these things on purpose, creating drama, seeking attention. It's pathetic." The words hit their target with surgical precision. After months of psychological warfare, Rick knew exactly how to make her doubt herself. Was she being dramatic? Had she bumped the table accidentally? Or was some part of her subconscious rebelling against this suffocating marriage? "The doctor says stress isn't good for the baby," she ventured, hoping to redirect his anger. "Don't blame your incompetence on my daughter." Rick's possessiveness over their unborn child chilled her blood. "She's going to be perfect, unlike her mother." Before Becca could respond, footsteps approached their table. She looked up to see the waiter returning with a tall, broad-shouldered man in a manager's jacket. Both men moved with the same controlled grace she recognized from her brother's military training. "Mr. Thornfield," the manager said with professional courtesy, "I'm Tommy Richardson. I own Romano's. I understand there was an incident." Rick's charm snapped back into place like a mask. "Nothing serious, My wife is pregnant and a bit unsteady on her feet. We appreciate your concern, but actually, the waiter interrupted, his eyes fixed on Becca's face. I witnessed the entire thing, sir. The last word carried weight that made Rick stiffen. Tommy Richardson stepped closer, and Becca saw him taking in details with the eye of someone trained to assess threats quickly. Ma'am, Tommy said gently, are you injured? Do you need medical attention? Becca started to shake her head automatically, but the waiter spoke again. I saw him hit her. Clear as day. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Rick's face flushed with rage, but he was trapped by his public persona. He couldn't afford to lose control in front of witnesses, not when his company's reputation depended on his image as a family man and community leader. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Rick said through gritted teeth. I was simply helping my wife. No misunderstanding. The waiter's voice cut through Rick's lies with military precision. I know what domestic violence looks like, and I know what I saw. Something in those words resonated deep in Becca's chest. This stranger was willing to stand up for her when no one else had, when her own family didn't even know what her life had become because Rick had systematically cut her off from everyone who might help. Listen, soldier boy, Rick snarled, his mask finally slipping. I don't know what kind of hero complex you're nursing, but this is none of your business. That's my wife, and I'll handle my family however I see fit. The waiter smiled then, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Actually, that's not just your wife. That's my sister. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Becca gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she really looked at the man who'd been serving their table. The same dark hair, the same green eyes, the same stubborn chin she saw in the mirror every day. Danny, she whispered. Staff Sergeant Daniel Sullivan stepped closer to the table, no longer hiding behind his server's uniform. He'd filled out since she'd seen him last, his shoulders broader from years of military training, his face harder from whatever he'd seen overseas. But his eyes were the same gentle green she remembered from their childhood, now blazing with protective fury. Hello, sis, he said softly. Been a while. Rick's face had gone pale, then red, then pale again as the implications hit him. You're the deadbeat brother, the one who never calls, never visits. Becca told me all about you. Did she now? Danny's voice was dangerously quiet. What exactly did she tell you? That you were a disappointment to the family, a grunt with no future who couldn't even stay in touch with his own sister. Rick was regaining his confidence, falling back on the lies he'd convinced Becca to tell to justify cutting off contact with her family. She said she was embarrassed by, That's enough. Danny's command voice cut through Rick's words like a blade. Sir, you need to step away from my sister. Now. Rick laughed, but it sounded forced. Or what? You'll assault me in front of all these witnesses? Good luck explaining that to your commanding officer, assuming you have one. Danny smiled again, and this time Tommy Richardson joined him. The two men exchanged a look that spoke of shared experience and mutual respect. Staff Sergeant Sullivan, Tommy said formally, would you like me to call the police, or would you prefer to handle this situation through military channels? Military channels, Rick scoffed. What's that supposed to mean? Tommy's smile widened. It means your wife's deadbeat brother is a decorated Marine sniper with 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star. It means he's earned the right to protect his family from bullies like you. And it means I've got his back because we served together in Afghanistan. The blood drained from Rick's face as he realized his mistake. Around them, other diners were starting to pay attention, some pulling out phones to record what was obviously becoming a confrontation. Now, Danny said, his voice carrying the absolute authority of someone accustomed to life and death decisions. You're going to apologize to my sister. Then you're going to pay your bill and leave. And if you ever lay a hand on her again, I'll show you what a real Marine can do. Rick's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For the first time in 3 years, Becca saw her husband truly afraid. Not angry, not controlling, but genuinely frightened of facing consequences for his actions. This is assault, Rick sputtered. Threatening a civilian, protecting a pregnant woman from domestic violence, Danny corrected. Big difference. Tommy, could you please call Detective Cooper? I think he'd be very interested in this situation. Already on it, Tommy replied, pulling out his phone. Frank's on his way. Rick shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor. You have no idea what you're dealing with. My mother is Judge Patricia Morrison. My lawyers will destroy both of you. Your mother, Danny said thoughtfully, the family court judge who's been covering up your first wife's accident for the past 5 years? The color drained completely from Rick's face. How did you? I'm a Marine, Rick. We do our homework. Danny helped Becca to her feet with gentle hands supporting her swollen belly. Especially when it comes to protecting family. Rick's facade crumbled completely. Without the advantage of fear and isolation, he was just a spoiled rich boy facing trained warriors. This isn't over, he snarled. You have no idea the resources I can bring to bear. I'll have your career ended, your life destroyed. Mr. Thornfield, Tommy's voice cut through the threat like steel. I think it's time for you to leave. Rick grabbed his jacket and threw money on the table, his hands shaking with rage. Come on, Rebecca. We're going home. No, Becca said quietly. The words surprised everyone, including herself. What did you say? Rick's voice was deadly quiet. Becca looked at her brother, then at Tommy, then at the other diners who were watching with sympathy and support. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't alone. I said no. Her voice grew stronger. I'm not going anywhere with you. Rick's hand moved toward her again, but Danny stepped between them faster than a striking snake. The movement was so smooth, so controlled, that Rick found himself facing a human wall of trained muscle and protective fury. Touch her, Danny said quietly, and see what happens. For a moment, the tension stretched taut as a wire. Then Rick's survival instincts finally kicked in. Whatever else he wasn't stupid enough to assault a Marine in front of dozens of witnesses. This isn't over, he repeated, backing toward the exit. You have no idea what you've done. Actually, Danny called after him, I know exactly what I've done. I've come home. As Rick disappeared through the restaurant's doors, Becca finally allowed herself to breathe. Then the tears came. 3 years of suppressed fear and pain pouring out in great shuddering sobs. Danny wrapped his arms around her, careful of her pregnant belly, and she smelled familiar cologne mixed with gun oil and honor. It smelled like safety. It smelled like home. It's okay, sis, he murmured into her hair. Big brother's here now. Nobody's gonna hurt you anymore. Around them, the restaurant erupted in applause, but Becca barely heard it. For the first time since her wedding day, she felt hope stirring in her chest alongside her daughter's kicks. The nightmare was ending. The real fight was about to begin. Danny guided Becca to a quiet booth in the back of Romano's, away from curious eyes and camera phones. Tommy had discreetly cleared the surrounding tables and posted his staff as a buffer against unwanted attention. The Brotherhood of Marines was already in full effect. I can't believe it's really you, Becca whispered, studying her brother's face. The boy she remembered had been replaced by a man hardened by war, but softened by love for his family. How long have you been working here? Just got back from deployment 2 weeks ago, Danny said, sliding a glass of water toward her. Tommy offered me part-time work while I figure out my next assignment. Pure coincidence that you and that piece of garbage showed up tonight. Tommy approached with a steaming cup of herbal tea. Chamomile, he explained. Good for stress, safe for pregnancy. My wife swore by it. Thank you. Becca wrapped her hands around the warm mug, using the heat to steady her shaking fingers. I'm so embarrassed. All those people watching. You have nothing to be embarrassed about, Danny said firmly. He's the one who should be ashamed. How long has this been going on, Becca? She couldn't meet his eyes. It started after the honeymoon. Little things at first. Criticism about my cooking, my clothes, my friends. He said he was trying to help me become the woman he knew I could be. Classic abuser behavior, Tommy observed grimly. Isolation first, then escalation. I thought I was going crazy, Becca continued. He'd say things, then deny saying them. He'd move my keys, then accuse me of being forgetful. When I tried to talk to Mom about it, he convinced me I was just stressed from the move and the new marriage. Danny's jaw clenched. Why didn't you call me? He said you were too busy saving the world to care about domestic problems. He showed me articles about military suicide rates, said the last thing you needed was family drama. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I believed him. I thought I was protecting you. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. While Danny had been protecting his country overseas, his sister had needed protection at home. "What about Mom? Your friends from teaching?" He gradually convinced me to cut contact with everyone, said they were jealous of our success, that they didn't understand our lifestyle. Becca's voice broke. By the time I realized what was happening, I was completely isolated. No job, no money, no support system. Tommy and Danny exchanged a look that spoke volumes. They'd seen this pattern before, in military families where spouses were left vulnerable while their partners deployed. The difference was that most military spouses had resources and support networks. Rick had systematically dismantled all of Becca's defenses. The pregnancy, Danny asked gently, was supposed to fix everything. Becca laughed bitterly. "I thought having a baby would make him happy, make him the family man he pretended to be in public. Instead, it made him worse. More controlling, more possessive." She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers, showing them a long list of missed calls and text messages from Rick. The messages grew increasingly threatening as the timestamps progressed. "He's been calling non-stop since he left," she said, "threatening to have me committed for postpartum depression, to take the baby, to ruin anyone who helps me." Danny read through the messages, his expression growing darker with each threat. "Becca, this isn't just domestic violence anymore. These are terroristic threats. And look at this. He's threatening federal employees. Me." Tommy leaned over to read the screen. "Son of a bitch is threatening to have you court-martialed for interfering in civilian matters. Like protecting your sister from assault is somehow against regulations." "Actually," Danny said with grim satisfaction, "it's exactly the opposite. Military personnel have a duty to intervene in situations involving domestic violence, especially when family members are at risk." Becca's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Rick calling. It was an unknown number. "Don't answer it," Danny advised, but Becca was already accepting the call. "Rebecca," the voice was cultured, commanding, and utterly cold. "This is Patricia Morrison. I believe you know who I am." Becca went pale. "Judge Morrison." "Former judge," the voice corrected. "Currently your mother-in-law and the woman who's going to ensure you never see your child again if you don't come to your senses immediately." Danny gestured for Becca to put the call on speaker. She hesitated, then complied. "Mrs. Morrison," Danny interjected, "this is Staff Sergeant Daniel Sullivan, United States Marine Corps. I'm Rebecca's brother." "Ah, the troublemaker." Patricia's voice was dismissive. "I've heard all about you, Sergeant. A decorated war hero according to my son's research. How impressive. Also completely irrelevant. Ma'am, with respect, your son just committed assault in front of multiple witnesses. My son defended himself against a hysterical pregnant woman and her unstable brother." Patricia's interruption was sharp as a blade. "At least that's what the witnesses will testify to when this goes to court." Tommy grabbed a pen and started writing notes. Danny recognized the behavior. Gathering intelligence, preparing for battle. Furthermore, Patricia continued, "I have medical records showing Rebecca's history of mental instability, financial records proving she's incapable of supporting a child, and character witnesses who will testify to her unfit nature as a mother." "Those are lies," Becca whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. After 3 years of psychological warfare, she no longer trusted her own judgment. "Are they? Can you prove that, my dear? Can you prove you're mentally stable when you're sitting in a restaurant, making scenes and turning your own brother against your husband? Can you prove you're financially independent when you haven't worked in 3 years and have no assets in your own name?" The questions hit like physical blows. Patricia Morrison had built her career destroying families in family court, and she was using those same tactics to terrorize her son's victim. "What do you want?" Danny asked quietly. "Simple. Rebecca comes home with my son tonight. She apologizes for this embarrassing scene and promises to be the wife and mother she's supposed to be. In return, she gets to keep her child. And if she refuses," Patricia's laugh was cold as winter, "then she'll find out exactly how much influence a former family court judge can wield. I know every social worker, every court clerk, every guardian ad litem in this state. I've placed children with families who deserved them and removed children from mothers who didn't. Care to guess which category Rebecca falls into?" The threat was crystal clear. Patricia Morrison had the connections and experience to destroy Becca's life through legal channels, and she was willing to use them to protect her son. "You have 1 hour," Patricia concluded. "After that, the wheels of justice start turning, and they don't stop until Rebecca is declared an unfit mother and my son has full custody of his daughter." The line went dead. In the silence that followed, Becca's quiet sobbing was the only sound. "She can do it," Becca whispered. "She really can take my baby away." "No," Danny said firmly, "she can't, because we're not going to let her." "Danny, you don't understand. She has connections, resources, decades of experience. And I have something she doesn't." Danny's smile was sharp as a blade. "I have the truth, and I have backup." He pulled out his own phone and started scrolling through contacts. "Tommy, I need you to preserve all the security footage from tonight. Every angle, every second." "Already done," Tommy replied. "Uploaded to secure cloud storage with copies going to my lawyer." "Good man." Danny found the contact he was looking for and hit dial. "Sarah Beth, it's Danny Sullivan. I know it's been a long time, but I need your help. It's about Becca." Becca gasped. "Sarah Beth Hamilton? My old roommate from college?" "The same Sarah Beth Hamilton, who's now one of the city's top divorce attorneys," Danny confirmed, "and who's been trying to reach you for 6 months." As Danny explained the situation to Sarah Beth, Becca felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Hope. Not just the desperate hope of a trapped woman, but the concrete hope of someone building a real escape plan. "She's on her way," Danny said, ending the call, "with a full legal team and emergency custody paperwork." "How is this possible?" Becca asked. "How are all these people willing to help someone they barely know?" Tommy sat down across from them, his expression serious. "Ma'am, with respect, you're not someone we barely know. You're Danny's sister, and in the Marine Corps, family is everything. Plus," Danny added with a grim smile, "Patricia Morrison made one crucial mistake when she threatened me." "What's that?" "She threatened a federal employee in the course of his duties. That makes this a federal case, not a state family court matter." Danny's expression was pure predator. "And I know some federal attorneys who eat corrupt judges for breakfast." Becca's phone buzzed again. Another text from Rick, this one even more threatening than the last. But for the first time, she didn't flinch when she read it. "What changed?" she asked herself out loud. "Ma'am?" Tommy looked confused. "I've been getting texts like this for months. They used to terrify me. Now," she stared at the screen, "now they just make me angry." Danny grinned. "That's the Sullivan backbone finally showing up. Took you long enough, sis." "I'm 8 months pregnant with nowhere to go and no money of my own," Becca pointed out. "This isn't exactly an ideal time to grow a backbone." "Actually," Tommy said thoughtfully, "it's the perfect time, because now you're not just fighting for yourself, you're fighting for your daughter." The truth of that statement hit Becca like a lightning bolt. Her baby girl deserved better than a father who would strike a pregnant woman and a grandmother who would steal children to cover up abuse. Her daughter deserved a mother who would fight back. "Okay," she said quietly. "What do we do?" Danny's grin widened. "We go to war." The penthouse apartment that had once been Becca's dream home felt like a mausoleum as she led Danny and Sarah Beth through rooms filled with expensive furniture and hidden cameras. Rick's obsession with control extended to every corner of their living space, and now Becca was seeing it all through fresh eyes. "There," she pointed to a small device mounted near the ceiling in the living room. "And there, and there. He monitors everything. Who comes and goes, what I do during the day, even what I watch on television." Sarah Beth Hamilton looked exactly like the successful attorney she'd become. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, and the kind of confidence that came from winning cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. She'd been Becca's roommate at college, back when Becca still believed in fairy tale endings. "This is a surveillance system that would make the NSA jealous," Sarah Beth observed, photographing each camera with her phone. "Completely illegal without your consent, by the way." "He said it was for security," Becca explained weakly. "We live in an expensive building, and he receives death threats from disgruntled former employees." Danny examined one of the cameras more closely. "Military-grade equipment. This stuff isn't available to civilian security companies." He looked at Sarah Beth. which means he's either buying from black market dealers or his company has military contracts that give him access to classified surveillance technology, Sarah Beth finished. Either way, it's illegal as hell. They moved through the apartment systematically, cataloging evidence. In the master bedroom, they found Becca's personal items. Her computer, her phone charger, even her medication, secured in a locked drawer that required Rick's fingerprint to open. I have to ask permission to take aspirin, Becca admitted, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. He says pregnancy makes women irrational, and he needs to monitor my health decisions. That's not monitoring, Danny said grimly. That's imprisonment. In Rick's home office, they struck gold. The man's arrogance had worked against him. His computer was still logged in, emails and documents scattered across multiple screens like a roadmap to his crimes. Holy shit, Sarah Beth breathed, scrolling through financial records. Becca, look at this. The screen showed bank accounts in Rick's name only, containing millions of dollars that should have been community property. But more disturbing were the emails between Rick and his business partner, Margaret Crawford. Emails that revealed not just an affair, but a conspiracy to hide assets and paint Becca as mentally unstable. Look at this one, Danny said, pointing to an email dated 3 weeks earlier. Rick's asking Maggie to recommend psychiatrists who would be willing to diagnose Becca with postpartum psychosis. Becca sank into a chair, her hands protective over her belly. Postpartum psychosis? But I haven't even given birth yet. Doesn't matter, Sarah Beth said, taking screenshots of everything. He's building a case to have you declared incompetent before the baby is even born. Look here, he's already consulted with a family attorney about emergency custody procedures. The betrayal was breathtaking in its scope. While Becca had been planning nurseries and choosing names, her husband had been planning to steal her child and destroy her life. There's more, Danny said, his voice deadly quiet. He'd found a folder labeled military contracts and was reading through documents that made his expression progressively darker. Son of a bitch. Sarah Beth, you need to see this. The military contracts revealed Rick's company had been systematically overcharging the government for substandard equipment. Body armor that didn't meet specifications, communication devices with known flaws, night vision equipment that had caused casualties in the field. Some of this equipment was used by my unit, Danny said, his voice tight with controlled rage. 3 Marines died last year because their comm systems failed during a firefight. Equipment that Rick's company provided. So he's not just abusing his wife, Sarah Beth observed. He's betraying the men and women who protect our country. And profiting from both, Danny added. Look at these profit margins. He's made millions selling defective equipment to the military while terrorizing his pregnant wife at home. Becca felt something break inside her chest, not her heart, but her last illusion about the man she'd married. I helped him get some of those contracts, she whispered. I used my connections from teaching military families. I introduced him to officers' wives who could put in good words with their husbands. That's not your fault, Sarah Beth said firmly. You couldn't have known. But I should have suspected something when the money kept rolling in, Becca interrupted. When he started spending more on cars than most people make in a year. When he began talking about military personnel like they were disposable. Danny knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Becca, listen to me. You're not responsible for his crimes. You're a victim of his manipulation, not an accomplice to his fraud. Maho. Try telling that to the families of the Marines who died, Becca said bitterly. I will, Danny said simply, because it's the truth, and because those families deserve to know who's really responsible for their losses. Sarah Beth looked up from the computer. There's something else here. Financial records showing payments to Patricia Morrison's campaign funds, donations to judicial oversight committees, even payments for her country club membership. Rick's been buying his mother's influence for years. Bribery? Becca asked. More like systematic corruption, Sarah Beth replied. Patricia Morrison has been using her position to shield her son from consequences while he built his criminal empire. The question is, how many other cases did she manipulate to protect Rick? Danny stood and began pacing, his military mind already strategizing. We need copies of everything. Financial records, emails, military contracts, surveillance footage. But we also need to get Becca somewhere safe before Rick realizes what we've discovered. Where? Becca asked. He has resources, connections, private investigators. His mother can probably track me through social services, medical records, anywhere I might go for help. Not anywhere, Danny said with a grim smile. Rick made another mistake when he threatened a Marine. Before he could explain, the sound of the apartment door opening echoed through the penthouse. Heavy footsteps in the marble foyer, moving fast and angry. Rebecca! Rick's voice boomed through the apartment. Where are you? We need to talk. The three froze. Rick wasn't supposed to be home for hours. His typical pattern was to storm out after a fight and spend the evening at his office or with Maggie. His early return could only mean one thing. He suspected something. Hide the evidence, Danny whispered, already moving to close computer windows and pocket flash drives. Sarah Beth, is there another way out of here? Service elevator, Becca whispered back, through the kitchen. But even as they moved toward escape, Rick's footsteps were getting closer. His voice carried the particular edge that Becca had learned to recognize as dangerous. The tone that preceded his worst episodes of violence. I know you're here, Rebecca, and I know you're not alone. The footsteps stopped just outside the office door. Did you really think you could humiliate me in public and not face consequences? Becca's contractions, which had been mild and intermittent all evening, suddenly intensified. Stress was triggering early labor, and her baby was responding to the flood of adrenaline and fear coursing through her system. Danny, she gasped, doubling over as pain shot through her abdomen. Something's wrong. The office door burst open, revealing Rick silhouetted against the hallway light. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes held the particular madness of a man who'd lost control of his carefully constructed world. Well, well, he said, taking in the scene. The war hero, the ambulance chaser, and my lying whore of a wife. How touching. Danny stepped protectively in front of Becca, his military training evident in every line of his body. Rick, you need to calm down. Becca's in labor. Becca's exactly where she belongs, Rick snarled. In my apartment, carrying my child, surrounded by my property. Everything in this room belongs to me, including her. That's where you're wrong, Sarah Beth said coolly, still photographing evidence even as the confrontation escalated. Community property laws, Rick. Half of everything here belongs to your wife, including the evidence of your crimes. Rick's face went purple with rage. Evidence? What evidence? Danny smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. The evidence that you've been defrauding the United States military for years. The evidence that your mother has been taking bribes to manipulate court cases. The evidence that you're planning to kidnap your own child. You can't prove any of that? Actually, we can. Sarah Beth held up her phone, showing the photos she'd been taking. It's all right here in your own emails, Rick. Your own financial records. Your own words condemning you. Rick's mask finally slipped completely. The charming millionaire businessman disappeared, replaced by something feral and desperate. You think you're so smart, don't you? All of you. But you have no idea what you're dealing with. He reached into his jacket, and Danny's training kicked in instantly. In one fluid motion, the Marine stepped forward and grabbed Rick's wrist, preventing him from drawing whatever weapon he'd been reaching for. Gun, Danny said quietly, his grip immobilizing Rick's arm. Ankle holster too, probably. Sarah Beth, call 911. Tell them we have a domestic violence situation with an armed suspect. You can't do this to me, Rick screamed, struggling against Danny's hold. I'm Richard Thornfield. I have contracts with the Pentagon. I employ hundreds of people. You're a criminal, Danny replied calmly, who just threatened 3 people with a concealed weapon, and you're under citizen's arrest until the police arrive. Becca, despite the pain of her contractions, felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Safety. Her brother, trained to protect and defend, stood between her and danger like an immovable wall. Sarah Beth, armed with legal expertise and documented evidence, was building the case that would free her from this nightmare. For the first time since her wedding day, Becca allowed herself to believe that escape was possible. But as sirens began to wail in the distance and Rick's threats grew more desperate, she realized that freedom would come at a price. Rick and his mother wouldn't give up without a fight, and they had resources that could make even victory feel like defeat. The real battle was just beginning. The apartment filled with police officers within minutes, but their arrival brought complications no one had anticipated. Detective Frank Cooper, a weathered man in his late 40s, surveyed the scene with the eye of someone who'd worked domestic violence cases for decades. What he saw didn't match the narrative he'd received from dispatch. "So let me get this straight," Detective Cooper said, notebook in hand. "Mr. Thornfield, you're claiming that Staff Sergeant Sullivan here assaulted you in your own home?" Rick had transformed once again, this time into the role of wounded victim. His expensive suit was artfully disheveled, his hair mussed just enough to suggest violence without looking completely fake. "Officer, I came home to find my pregnant wife being manipulated by her unstable brother and some lawyer who's trying to steal my assets." "That's a lie," Becca said, but her voice was weak from the stress-induced contractions that were coming more frequently now. "Mrs. Thornfield," Detective Cooper said gently, "are you all right? You look like you're in pain." "She's in early labor," Danny explained, "brought on by stress from her husband's abuse. We have witnesses to his assault of her at Romano's Steakhouse earlier tonight." Rick's lawyer arrived then, a sharp-dressed man who looked like he charged by the minute and specialized in making problems disappear. "Detective Cooper, I'm James Mitchell, representing Mr. Thornfield. My client is the victim here, not the aggressor." "Your client was reaching for a concealed weapon when I restrained him," Danny said calmly. "Standard disarmament procedure." Detective Cooper looked between the various parties, then at Sarah Beth, who was still holding her phone full of photographic evidence. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to explain your presence here." "Sarah Beth Hamilton, attorney representing Mrs. Thornfield in divorce proceedings. I'm also documenting evidence of domestic violence, financial fraud, and conspiracy to commit child endangerment." Mitchell scoffed. "Allegations without foundation, Detective. My client is a respected businessman with government contracts and community standing. These people are trying to extort him using false claims." "False claims?" Sarah Beth held up her phone. "I have emails between Mr. Thornfield and his business partner discussing plans to have his pregnant wife declared mentally incompetent. I have financial records showing systematic fraud against military contracts. I have surveillance footage of him striking a pregnant woman in a public restaurant." Detective Cooper's expression grew more serious. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to need to see those emails." "Those are privileged communications stolen from a private residence," Mitchell replied smoothly. "Fruit of the poisonous tree, inadmissible in any court." "Actually," Danny interjected, "the emails were displayed on an unlocked computer in plain view when we entered the apartment legally with Mrs. Thornfield, who has equal right of access as a spouse." Cooper studied Danny with new interest. "You have legal training, Sergeant?" "Military police certification and advanced combat law enforcement training," Danny replied. "I know the rules of evidence." Rick's facade was beginning to crack under the pressure. "Detective, I demand that these people be removed from my property immediately. They're trespassing and harassing my pregnant wife." "Your pregnant wife who you struck in public?" Cooper's tone had shifted, becoming more investigative than diplomatic. "I never struck anyone," Rick protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "We have multiple witnesses," Sarah Beth said, "including video footage from the restaurant's security cameras and cell phone recordings from other diners." Mitchell whispered something urgent in Rick's ear, and the millionaire's expression became even more desperate. "Detective, you don't understand. My wife is having a mental breakdown. She's been erratic, unstable, making false accusations. Her brother is enabling her delusions." "The only delusion here," a new voice said from the apartment entrance, "is your belief that you can continue to abuse women without consequences." Everyone turned to see a woman in scrubs entering the apartment. Dr. Elizabeth Porter, Becca's obstetrician. She moved directly to Becca's side, professional concern overriding the dramatic circumstances. "Rebecca, how frequent are the contractions?" "Doctor," Porter asked, taking her patient's pulse while glaring at Rick with undisguised contempt. "Every few minutes," Becca gasped. "Sharp pain, low in my back. We need to get you to the hospital immediately." Dr. Porter turned to Detective Cooper. "Officer, this woman is in premature labor, likely triggered by severe stress. She needs medical attention now, not interrogation." Rick stepped forward. "As her husband, I'll accompany her to—" "No!" Dr. Porter's voice cut through his words like steel. "Absolutely not. Detective Cooper, I'm filing a formal report about the suspicious nature of Rebecca's previous injuries over the past 6 months. Pattern injuries consistent with domestic violence. The room fell silent. Dr. Porter had just provided the missing piece of evidence, medical documentation of ongoing abuse. Furthermore, Dr. Porter continued, pulling out her own phone, I have photographs and detailed records of injuries Rebecca claimed were accidents. Bruises on her wrist consistent with restraint, bruising on her ribs from impacts, and psychological symptoms indicating systematic emotional abuse. Mitchell started to object, but Detective Cooper held up a hand. Doctor, you're required by law to report suspected domestic violence, correct? I am, and I should have reported it sooner, but Rebecca begged me not to. She was terrified of what her husband might do. Dr. Porter's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing her personal guilt. I failed her by staying silent. You didn't fail anyone, Danny said quietly. You're here now, when she needs you most. Rick's composure finally shattered completely. This is a conspiracy. All of you are trying to destroy me because you're jealous of my success. Rebecca, tell them. Tell them you love me, that we're happy together. Becca looked at her husband, really looked at him. For what felt like the first time in 3 years, she saw the desperation beneath his anger, the fear behind his threats, the emptiness at the core of his charm. Most clearly, she saw what her daughter would become if she allowed this man to raise her. No, she said quietly. I won't lie for you anymore, Rick. I won't let you hurt our baby the way you've hurt me. You can't leave me. Rick's voice rose to a shout. I own you. I own this apartment, your clothes, your car, everything. Without me, you're nothing. Actually, Sarah Beth interjected, under community property laws, Rebecca owns half of everything acquired during the marriage, including assets you've tried to hide from her. Detective Cooper had heard enough. Mr. Thornfield, you're under arrest for domestic violence, assault, and threatening behavior. Mr. Mitchell, your client can make his calls from downtown. As Cooper read Rick his rights, the millionaire's final mask fell away. You have no idea what you've done, he snarled at Becca. My mother will destroy you in court. You'll never see that baby again. I'll make sure you end up in a psychiatric hospital where you belong. Mr. Thornfield, Danny said quietly, you're under arrest. I'd recommend exercising your right to remain silent. But Rick was beyond rational thought. You think you've won something, soldier boy? You think your little war medals mean anything against my resources? I'll have you court-martialed, dishonorably discharged, imprisoned for interfering with civilian law enforcement. Cooper finished the arrest and turned to Dr. Porter. Doctor, how urgent is Mrs. Thornfield's medical situation? Very urgent. She needs to be monitored immediately to prevent premature delivery. Dr. Porter helped Becca to her feet. The stress of this confrontation could cause serious complications for both mother and baby. As paramedics arrived to transport Becca to the hospital, Sarah Beth finished securing evidence from Rick's computer. Detective, I'll forward all of this to the prosecutor's office within the hour. The financial fraud against military contracts makes this a federal case as well as a state domestic violence case. Understood. Sergeant Sullivan, you'll need to give a formal statement. Roger that, Detective, but first I'm going to make sure my sister and niece are safe. Rick was led away in handcuffs, still shouting threats and promises of revenge. Mitchell followed, already on his phone with what sounded like very expensive damage control. In the sudden quiet that followed, Becca felt her daughter kick strongly against her ribs, not the panicked movements of earlier, but something that felt almost like approval. It's going to be okay, baby girl, she whispered, one hand on her belly as Danny helped her toward the door. Mama's finally going to protect us both. But even as relief flooded through her, Becca knew that Rick's arrest was just the first battle in a war that would determine her daughter's future. Patricia Morrison was still out there, still armed with judicial connections and years of experience in destroying families. The real fight was just beginning, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The hospital room felt like a sanctuary after the chaos of the apartment. But Becca knew the safety was temporary. Her contractions had slowed with medication and rest, buying precious time for her daughter to develop further. Dr. Porter had been cautiously optimistic. If they could keep the baby from coming for another few weeks, both mother and child would be much safer. 34 weeks is better than 32, the doctor had explained, but 37 weeks would be ideal. Danny sat in the visitor's chair, his military bearing somewhat relaxed now that his sister was safe and under medical care. But Becca could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly scanned the room's entrances. A warrior's vigilance never truly rested. "You should get some sleep," she told him. "The nurse said visiting hours end at 10. "I'm not leaving," Danny replied simply. "Not until we know Rick and his mother can't get to you." A soft knock at the door interrupted them, followed by Sarah Beth entering with another woman Becca didn't recognize. Tall, elegant, with silver hair, and the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention. "Rebecca, I'd like you to meet someone," Sarah Beth said. "This is Senator Catherine Williams from the Armed Services Committee." Becca struggled to sit up straighter, suddenly conscious of her hospital gown and exhausted appearance. "Senator Williams, I don't understand." "I'm here about your husband's military contracts," the senator said, taking a seat with practiced ease, "and about the defective equipment that may have cost American lives." Danny straightened in his chair. "Ma'am, some of that equipment was used by my unit in Afghanistan. 3 Marines died during a mission where communication systems failed." Senator Williams nodded gravely. "Staff Sergeant Sullivan, I've been investigating defense contractor fraud for months. Your brother-in-law's company has been on our radar, but we've lacked the evidence to build a solid case. Until now." Sarah Beth opened her laptop and began displaying the documents they'd gathered from Rick's apartment. "Senator, what you're seeing here is systematic overbilling, delivery of substandard equipment, and falsification of safety test results." "My God," the senator breathed, scrolling through financial records. "The scope of this fraud. Rebecca, you had no knowledge of these activities?" "None," Becca said firmly. "Rick told me his company provided communication equipment to the military, but he never discussed details. He said it was classified information that spouses weren't allowed to know." "Convenient," Senator Williams observed, "and completely false. Defense contractors are required to maintain transparency with family members who have security clearances." "I don't have a security clearance," Becca said, confused. "Actually, you do. Your teaching position at the base school required one, a fact your husband knew when he married you." The senator's expression grew grim. "Which means his claims of classification were just another method of control and isolation." The implications hit Becca like a physical blow. Even her career qualifications had been used against her, twisted into justification for exclusion and secrecy. "Senator," Danny said, "what does this mean for the case against Rick?" "It means we're dealing with a national security issue, not just domestic violence. The Department of Defense takes contractor fraud very seriously, especially when it results in casualties." Senator Williams closed the laptop. "Rebecca, I need you to know that testifying against your husband will require courage, but it will also help ensure that no more service members die because of his greed." Before Becca could respond, another knock interrupted them. This time it was Detective Cooper, accompanied by a woman in a crisp FBI windbreaker. "Mrs. Thornfield, this is Special Agent Rachel Torres from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. She'd like to speak with you about your husband's business activities." Agent Torres stepped forward with professional courtesy. "Mrs. Thornfield, I understand you've been through significant trauma, but the evidence you've provided has allowed us to obtain warrants for additional searches. We've discovered that your husband's fraud extends beyond military contracts." "What do you mean?" Becca asked. "Money laundering, tax evasion, bribery of public officials." Torres consulted her notes. "Including systematic payments to his mother, former Judge Patricia Morrison, to influence court cases involving his business interests." Sarah Beth leaned forward. "How many cases?" "Over the past 5 years, nearly 100. Custody cases where Morrison awarded children to fathers who made significant donations to her campaign. Divorce settlements that favored Morrison's supporters. Criminal cases where charges were dismissed or reduced in exchange for financial considerations. The scope of the corruption was staggering. Patricia Morrison hadn't just been protecting her son, she'd been running a criminal enterprise from the family court bench." "Where is Patricia Morrison now?" Danny asked. "Under federal investigation," Agent Torres replied. "She's been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of our inquiry, which means she has no authority to influence your custody case, Mrs. Thornfield." Relief flooded through Becca. followed immediately by a new fear. But she still has connections, resources. She won't just give up because she's under investigation. Actually, Detective Cooper interjected, she might not have a choice. We arrested her an hour ago on corruption charges. She's currently in federal custody without bail. The room fell silent as the news sank in. Patricia Morrison, the woman who had terrorized Becca with threats of losing her child, was now facing her own legal nightmare. What happens to Rick's threats about custody? Becca asked. Sarah Beth smiled for the first time since the crisis began. They become meaningless. With Patricia Morrison under arrest and Rick facing federal charges, you have a clear path to divorce and full custody. But even as relief washed over her, Becca felt overwhelmed by the rapid changes. 3 days ago, she'd been trapped in an abusive marriage with no hope of escape. Now she was surrounded by lawyers, federal agents, and senators, all working to dismantle her husband's criminal empire. I don't understand how this happened so fast, she admitted. Yesterday I was completely alone. And now you have an army, Danny said simply. Because that's what happens when good people learn that someone needs help. Agent Torres packed up her files. Mrs. Thornfield will need formal testimony in the coming weeks. But for now, focus on your health and your baby. The legal machinery is in motion, and it will proceed whether you're actively involved or not. Senator Williams stood to leave as well. Rebecca, I want you to know that your courage in coming forward will prevent other military families from suffering losses due to defective equipment. That's a legacy to be proud of. After the officials left, the hospital room felt almost empty with only Becca, Danny, and Sarah Beth remaining. So what happens now? Becca asked. Becca, now you rest, Sarah Beth said. The divorce proceedings will take months, but Rick's assets are frozen, which means you have access to community funds for living expenses and legal fees. And the baby? We'll be born free, Danny said quietly. No matter what else happens, your daughter will grow up knowing that her mother fought for her safety and won. Becca felt tears welling up, not tears of fear or pain, but of overwhelming gratitude. Her daughter kicked again, more gently this time, as if sensing the change in her mother's emotional state. I want to name her Hope, Becca said suddenly. Hope Sullivan Thornfield. She can decide later if she wants to keep her father's name, but right now, she represents everything I thought I'd lost. Danny smiled, and for the first time since childhood, Becca saw her big brother's pride without any shadow of worry behind it. Hope Sullivan Thornfield, he repeated. I like it, and I promise you, sis, I'll make sure she grows up knowing exactly how brave her mother is. Outside the hospital window, dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. For the first time in 3 years, Becca looked forward to seeing what the new day would bring. But in the back of her mind, she knew that Rick and his remaining allies wouldn't surrender without a fight. The legal battles were just beginning, and the real test of her newfound strength was yet to come. 2 weeks later, Becca's contractions returned with a vengeance during what should have been a routine prenatal appointment. Dr. Porter took one look at her patient's flushed face and elevated blood pressure and made the decision that would change everything. We're not waiting any longer, the doctor announced. 36 weeks is close enough, and your stress levels are putting both you and the baby at risk. But I'm not ready, Becca protested, even as another contraction made her double over. The nursery isn't finished. I don't have a car seat installed. I haven't even packed a hospital bag. Breathe, Danny commanded, using his military voice to cut through her panic. Sarah Beth and I have everything handled. Your only job right now is to bring our niece into the world safely. But even as he spoke confidently, Danny's eyes were scanning the hospital corridors with the hypervigilance of someone expecting trouble. Rick had been released on bail 3 days earlier, pending trial, and his lawyer had been making noise about protecting his parental rights and ensuring his daughter's safety from an unstable mother. Danny, Becca gasped between contractions. What if he shows up? What if he tries to take her? Then he'll have to go through me, her brother replied grimly. And Tommy, and half the Marines in the city who've heard about this case. Sarah Beth burst into the room, slightly out of breath and carrying what looked like military-grade communication equipment. Hospital security has been notified, she reported. No one gets near this floor without proper identification and specific clearance. Tommy's stationed in the lobby with 3 of his restaurant staff who happen to be veterans. Is all this really necessary? Dr. Porter asked, but she was already moving efficiently around the room, preparing for delivery. Surely Mr. Thornfield wouldn't be foolish enough to cause a scene in a hospital. You don't know Rick, Becca said through gritted teeth. He thinks he owns everything he touches, including our baby. As if summoned by her words, a commotion erupted in the hallway outside. Raised voices, authoritative commands, and the unmistakable sound of someone demanding access who was being denied. That's him, Becca whispered, her face going pale. He's here. Danny was already moving toward the door, his military training evident in every step. Sarah Beth, stay with Becca. Dr. Porter, is there another way out of here if we need it? The service elevator leads directly to the parking garage, Dr. Porter replied, but her attention was focused on her patient. Rebecca, I need you to concentrate on breathing. Your daughter is coming, whether her father is here or not. The voices in the hallway grew louder, closer. Rick's voice carried clearly through the door, alternating between charm and threats as he tried to convince hospital security to let him pass. That's my wife in there. My daughter is being born. You can't keep a father from his child. Sir, you're on the restricted list, came the firm response from hospital security. We have a court order preventing you from approaching Mrs. Thornfield without supervision. Court order? I haven't been served with any court order. Sarah Beth pulled out her phone, scrolling through legal documents. Emergency restraining order, she explained to Danny. Filed this morning when we learned he'd made bail. Should have been served hours ago. The door handle rattled, and Danny positioned himself directly in front of it, his body becoming a human barrier between Rick and his sister. Let me in, Rebecca. Rick's voice was muffled by the door, but still audible. I know you're scared, but I'm here now. Everything's going to be all right. No, Becca said, her voice stronger than anyone expected. Nothing is all right, Rick. Nothing has been all right since our wedding day. The contractions were coming faster now, and Dr. Porter was moving with the controlled urgency of someone who had delivered thousands of babies. Rebecca, I need you to focus on me, not on what's happening outside this room. Your daughter needs you to be present for her birth. She's right, Danny said, never taking his eyes off the door. Sis, you fought too hard to let him steal this moment from you. Bring hope into the world surrounded by people who love you both. Another commotion erupted in the hallway. This time, it sounded like additional security arriving. Through the door, they could hear Rick's protests becoming more desperate, more unhinged. You don't understand. They've brainwashed her. My wife is having a mental breakdown, and her unstable brother is enabling it. I'm trying to protect my daughter. Sir, you need to come with us now. The new voice carried absolute authority. Detective Cooper, backed by federal agents. You can't arrest me for trying to see my own child being born. Actually, we can arrest you for violating a restraining order, intimidating witnesses, and about 15 other charges related to your ongoing federal investigation. The sound of handcuffs clicking into place was audible even through the hospital door. Rick's voice rose to a shout of pure rage. This isn't over, Rebecca. You think you've won something, but I'll appeal every decision, fight every ruling. My daughter will know the truth about what kind of mother you really are. The only truth, Becca said clearly, her voice carrying through the door, is that our daughter deserves better than a father who would terrorize her pregnant mother. The voices faded as Rick was led away, but the damage to Becca's stress levels had been done. Her contractions intensified dramatically, and Dr. Porter's expression grew serious. We're having this baby now, the doctor announced. Danny, Sarah Beth, I need you both to help keep Rebecca calm and focused. What followed was a whirlwind of medical activity, coaching, and the kind of intense physical effort that left no room for fear or doubt. Becca discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed, drawing on months of suppressed courage and determination. Push, Rebecca, Dr. Porter commanded. Your daughter wants to meet you. 20 minutes later, Hope Sullivan Thornfield entered the world with a lusty cry that seemed to announce her intention to be heard. She was small but perfect, with her mother's dark hair and what looked like her uncle's determined chin. She's beautiful, Danny whispered, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his niece for the first time. Absolutely perfect. Sarah Beth was crying too, photographing every moment with the dedication of someone who understood that this was history being made. Not just the birth of a baby, but the birth of freedom for both mother and child. "Hello, Hope," Becca whispered as Dr. Porter placed her daughter on her chest. "Mama's here. You're safe now." The baby's crying stopped as she heard her mother's voice, her tiny fist grasping Becca's finger with surprising strength. In that moment, Becca felt the last chains of her marriage to Rick Thornfield finally break. "No one will ever hurt you," she promised her daughter. "Not while I have breath in my body." Through the hospital window, the city lights twinkled like stars, and Becca realized that for the first time in years, she was looking at a future full of possibilities instead of prison walls. Hope had arrived, and with her, hope itself. But even in that perfect moment, Becca knew that Rick's threats weren't empty. The legal battles would continue, the custody fights would be brutal, and there would be days when the weight of single motherhood would feel overwhelming. The difference was that now she wouldn't face those challenges alone. She had Danny, Sarah Beth, Dr. Porter, and a growing network of people who believed in her strength. Most importantly, she had hope, a tiny, perfect reason to keep fighting for the life they both deserved. The real work of building that life was just beginning. 6 months after Hope's birth, the federal courthouse had become as familiar to Becca as her own apartment. Today's hearing would determine not just the outcome of Rick's criminal trial, but the future of her daughter's custody. She sat in the witness box, her 6-month-old daughter sleeping peacefully in Sarah Beth's arms in the gallery, surrounded by an unlikely army of supporters. "Mrs. Thornfield," the federal prosecutor began, "please tell the court about your husband's business activities as you understood them during your marriage." Becca took a deep breath, drawing strength from the sight of Hope's peaceful face. "Rick told me he provided communication equipment to the military, but he never discussed details. He said it was classified information that I wasn't cleared to know." "But you did have security clearance, correct?" "Yes, from my teaching position at the base school. I found out later that Rick knew about my clearance when he married me, which means his claims of classification were lies designed to keep me isolated." Prosecutor Janet Chen nodded and moved to her next exhibit. "Mrs. Thornfield, I'm showing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 47. Do you recognize this email?" Becca studied the document projected on the courtroom screen. "Yes, it's an email from Rick to his business partner, Margaret Crawford, discussing plans to have me declared mentally incompetent after Hope was born. Can you read the relevant portion for the court?" Becca's voice remained steady as she read her husband's words. "Once the baby is born, we proceed with the psychiatric evaluation. Rebecca will resist, but her history of accidents and erratic behavior will support the incompetence ruling. Full custody to me, and she disappears into whatever facility we choose." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Even the judge, who had presided over hundreds of criminal cases, looked disturbed by the calculated cruelty of Rick's plan. "Mrs. Thornfield, what did your husband mean by your history of accidents?" "The injuries he caused," Becca replied. "Bruises from being grabbed, cuts from being pushed into furniture, a sprained wrist from being yanked too hard. Rick would tell people I was clumsy because of pregnancy hormones." Rick's defense attorney, an expensive suit named Marcus Webb, stood to object, but Prosecutor Chen was ready for him. "Your Honor, we have medical records from Dr. Elizabeth Porter documenting a pattern of injuries consistent with domestic violence, as well as photographs taken by the doctor without the defendant's knowledge." "Objection overruled. Continue, Ms. Chen." The prosecutor spent the next 2 hours systematically building her case, using Rick's own emails and financial records to paint a picture of systematic fraud, domestic abuse, and conspiracy. The military contracts that had made Rick wealthy were revealed to be instruments of betrayal, substandard equipment that had cost American lives while generating massive profits. "Mrs. Thornfield," Prosecutor Chen said, approaching her final questions, "did you know that communication equipment manufactured by your husband's company failed during combat operations, resulting in the deaths of 3 Marines?" "Not until my brother told me," Becca replied, her voice breaking slightly. "Danny served with those Marines. They were his friends." "And how did you feel when you learned that your husband's fraud had contributed to their deaths?" Becca looked directly at Rick for the first time during the trial. He sat at the defense table in another expensive suit, his face a mask of calculated innocence. But she could see the rage burning in his eyes, the fury of a man who had lost control of his carefully constructed world. "I felt sick," she said clearly, "and I felt responsible because I had helped him get some of those contracts through my connections with military families." "Mrs. Thornfield, let me be clear. You are not responsible for your husband's crimes. But I want to ask you about something else. Why are you testifying here today?" Becca looked at Hope, sleeping peacefully despite the courtroom drama surrounding her. "Because my daughter deserves to grow up in a world where the truth matters, where people who commit crimes face consequences, where women don't have to live in fear of the men who claim to love them." "Thank you. No further questions." Defense attorney Webb's cross-examination was brutal but predictable. He tried to paint Becca as an unstable, vindictive wife who had fabricated abuse allegations to gain advantage in divorce proceedings. He questioned her mental state, her motivations, even her fitness as a mother. "Mrs. Thornfield, isn't it true that you went to great lengths to hide your pregnancy from your husband initially?" "No, that's not true. But you did research adoption agencies, didn't you?" Sarah Beth stood to object, but Becca held up a hand. "I researched resources for women in abusive relationships, including adoption agencies that help abuse victims. I was trying to understand my options. Options that included giving up your husband's child without his knowledge. Options that included protecting my unborn daughter from a father who hit pregnant women in public restaurants." Webb tried several more angles, but Becca's testimony remained consistent and compelling. She had documented everything, saved every threatening text, remembered every detail of her abuse with the clarity that comes from trauma. When the prosecution rested, they had presented a case that was devastating in its scope and precision. Rick Thornfield wasn't just an abusive husband or a white-collar criminal. He was a man who had betrayed his country, his family, and his most basic obligations as a human being. The defense case lasted less than a day. Webb called character witnesses who testified to Rick's business success and community involvement, but their testimony felt hollow against the weight of documented evidence. Rick himself chose not to testify, probably on advice of counsel. But the real surprise came during the penalty phase, when Prosecutor Chen called an unexpected witness. The prosecution calls Margaret Crawford. Rick's former business partner and lover entered the courtroom in shackles, her own legal troubles having convinced her to cooperate with federal prosecutors. She looked like a broken woman, the confident executive who had helped orchestrate Rick's crimes, replaced by someone facing her own lengthy prison sentence. "Ms. Crawford," Prosecutor Chen began, "please tell the court about your personal relationship with the defendant." "We had an affair," Margaret said quietly. "It started about 2 years ago, while Rebecca was pregnant." "Did the defendant ever discuss his wife during your relationship?" Margaret's eyes flicked toward Rick, who was staring at her with undisguised hatred. "He said she was weak, that she would be easy to control and eventually dispose of when she was no longer useful." "Dispose of?" "He planned to have her declared incompetent and institutionalized after the baby was born. He said his mother could arrange it through her court connections." "Did you ever witness the defendant physically abuse his wife?" "Once, at a company party. Rebecca accidentally spilled wine on his shirt, and he grabbed her so hard he left bruises on her arms. When people noticed, he laughed it off and said she bruised easily." "What was your impression of Mrs. Thornfield during your interactions with her?" Margaret's voice broke slightly. "She was terrified of him, always walking on eggshells, always apologizing, always trying to anticipate his moods. I should have said something. I should have helped her." "Why didn't you?" "Because Rick said she was mentally unstable, that helping her would only make things worse. I believed him because it was easier than confronting what I was helping him do." The impact of Margaret's testimony was devastating. Here was Rick's own co-conspirator confirming the systematic nature of his abuse and the calculated cruelty of his plans for Becca and Hope. When the verdict came 3 hours later, it was swift and unanimous, guilty on all counts. Rick Thornfield would spend the next 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for at least 15 years. But the judge wasn't finished. In a rare display of judicial emotion, he addressed Rick directly before imposing sentence. "Mr. Thornfield, in 30 years on this bench, I have rarely seen such a combination of arrogance, cruelty, and callous disregard for human life. You betrayed your country, endangered the lives of service members, and terrorized your pregnant wife while planning to steal her child. You represent the worst of what power and privilege can become when unchecked by conscience or consequence. Rick stood stoically as the sentence was read, but Becca could see his hands shaking with suppressed rage. Even in defeat, he couldn't accept responsibility for the destruction he had caused. As the courtroom cleared, Becca found herself surrounded by people whose lives Rick had damaged. Military families whose loved ones had died because of defective equipment, other women who had suffered abuse in silence, federal agents who had worked tirelessly to build the case that brought him down. "It's over," Sarah Beth said, embracing her client and friend. "He can't hurt you or Hope anymore." But Danny, ever the protective brother, looked troubled. "It's not completely over. Patricia Morrison is still facing her own trial, and Rick still has supporters who might cause problems." "Let them come," Becca said, surprising everyone with the steel in her voice. "I'm not the same woman who was too scared to ask for help 6 months ago. I know who I am now, and I know what I'm capable of." Hope stirred in her arms, opening bright green eyes that seemed to take in the world with fearless curiosity. She was growing up surrounded by people who had fought for justice, protected the innocent, and refused to let evil go unopposed. "Mama's got you," Becca whispered to her daughter, "and Mama's never backing down again." The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and supporters as they emerged into the afternoon sunlight. For the first time in years, Becca didn't flinch from the attention. She had a story worth telling, a truth worth sharing, and a daughter worth protecting. The battle was won, but the work of healing was just beginning. The verdict should have been the end, but Patricia Morrison had spent 40 years manipulating the legal system, and federal conviction hadn't dampened her determination to destroy the woman who had exposed her son's crimes. 3 days after Rick's sentencing, she struck back through the only channel still available to her, a civil custody suit filed in family court, claiming that Becca was an unfit mother who had endangered her grandchild through reckless and vindictive behavior. "She can't actually win this, can she?" Becca asked Sarah Beth as they reviewed the custody filing in the lawyer's downtown office. Hope slept peacefully in her carrier, oblivious to the legal storms swirling around her 6-month-old life. "Legally? No, she doesn't have a case. Patricia Morrison is a disgraced former judge, facing her own criminal charges. Any reasonable court would dismiss this filing immediately." Sarah Beth's expression was grim. "But Patricia still has allies on the bench, and she's shopping for a friendly judge who might be willing to cause problems." Danny paced the office like a caged predator, his military instincts on high alert. "So what's her endgame? She has to know she can't actually get custody of Hope." "The goal isn't to win," Sarah Beth explained. "It's to exhaust Becca's resources, damage her reputation, and make her life so miserable that she'll consider some kind of settlement or compromise." "What kind of compromise?" Becca asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Supervised visitation for Rick when he gets out of prison. Shared custody arrangements that give the Thornfield family ongoing control over Hope's life. Financial concessions that leave you dependent on their goodwill." Sarah Beth's voice was tight with anger. "Classic abuser tactics, just conducted through the court system instead of behind closed doors." "Oh." Before anyone could respond, Danny's phone buzzed with an urgent text. His expression darkened as he read it. "Tommy's Restaurant," he said grimly. "Patricia Morrison just showed up with 2 private investigators and a process server. She's trying to serve papers claiming Becca is hiding assets and interfering with grandparental rights." "Grandparental rights?" Becca felt her blood pressure spike. "She's never even seen Hope. She threatened to take my baby away before she was born." "Doesn't matter," Sarah Beth said, already gathering legal files. "In family court, biological relationships carry weight regardless of behavior. We need to get down there and shut this down before she creates a public scene that could damage your case." Romano's Steakhouse was crowded with the lunch rush when they arrived, but the tension was immediately apparent. Patricia Morrison stood near the hostess station like a queen holding court, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits who were clearly not there for the pasta special. Tommy was behind the bar, his military bearing evident in the way he watched the intruders without appearing to do so. Mrs. Sullivan Thornfield, Patricia called out as Becca entered, her voice carrying across the restaurant with judicial authority. How convenient that you're here. My process server has some documents for you. Becca felt every eye in the restaurant turn toward her, and for a moment, the old fear threatened to overwhelm her. This was exactly the kind of public humiliation that Rick had used to control her. The threat of social embarrassment, of being exposed as somehow defective or shameful. But then Hope made a soft, cooing sound from her carrier, and Becca remembered who she was fighting for. Mrs. Morrison, she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the restaurant. You're under federal indictment for corruption and bribery. You have no legal standing to make any claims regarding my daughter. I have every right to ensure my granddaughter's welfare, Patricia replied, her mask of respectability firmly in place, especially when her mother is clearly making poor decisions that could endanger the child. Poor decisions like what? Danny asked, stepping protectively beside his sister. Like protecting Hope from a father who committed domestic violence and federal fraud? One of Patricia's investigators moved closer, and Tommy was suddenly there, blocking his path with the casual efficiency of someone who had handled much more dangerous situations. Gentlemen, Tommy said pleasantly, this is a private establishment. Mrs. Morrison, you and your associates need to conduct your business elsewhere. I have every right to be here, Patricia snapped, but some of her composure was cracking. She'd clearly expected Becca to crumble under pressure, not stand her ground in front of witnesses. Sarah Beth stepped forward, her lawyer instincts taking over. Actually, you don't. You're violating the restraining order that prevents you from approaching my client or her child without court supervision. What restraining order? I was never served. Sarah Beth smiled and pulled out her phone. The emergency order filed this morning when we learned about your custody suit. Detective Cooper, could you come in, please? Detective Cooper entered the restaurant with two uniformed officers, clearly having been waiting outside for exactly this development. Mrs. Morrison, Cooper said formally, you're in violation of a court order. You need to leave immediately. This is harassment, Patricia sputtered, but her investigators were already backing toward the exit. They'd been caught off guard by the coordinated response, expecting to intimidate a vulnerable single mother instead of facing a prepared legal team. What's harassment, Becca said, her voice growing stronger with each word, is filing frivolous lawsuits against an abuse victim to protect your criminal son. What's harassment is threatening to steal a baby from her mother because you can't accept that your family's crimes have been exposed. The restaurant had gone completely quiet, every patron focused on the confrontation playing out before them. Becca realized that this was her moment, not just to defend herself, but to speak truth that other women needed to hear. Mrs. Morrison, you raised a son who hits pregnant women and steals from the military. You spent decades corrupting our justice system to protect him from consequences. You threatened to have me declared mentally ill and take my daughter away because I finally found the courage to ask for help. Patricia's face had gone white with rage, but she was trapped by the presence of police officers and a restaurant full of witnesses. You're making a mistake, she hissed. You have no idea the resources I can bring to bear, the connections I still have, the damage I can do to your pathetic little life. Maybe, Becca replied calmly. But you know what you can't do? You can't make me afraid anymore. You can't make me doubt myself anymore. You can't make me believe that asking for help makes me weak or that protecting my daughter makes me selfish. Hope chose that moment to wake up and look around the restaurant with bright, curious eyes. Several diners smiled at the sight of the beautiful baby, and Becca felt their support like a physical warmth. This little girl, Becca continued, adjusting Hope's blanket, is going to grow up knowing that her mother fought for her, that when powerful people tried to hurt us, good people stood up to help. That justice isn't just for the wealthy and connected, but for everyone brave enough to demand it. Patricia Morrison had built her power on intimidation and fear, but she had no response to simple truth spoken with courage. Her investigators were already at the door, clearly unwilling to be part of a public relations disaster. This isn't over, Patricia said, falling back on the threat that had always worked before. Yes, it is, Danny said quietly. Ma'am, your son is in federal prison. You're facing your own criminal charges. You have no power, no influence, and no legal standing. The only thing you have left is the choice to walk away with whatever dignity remains to you. For a moment, Patricia Morrison looked every one of her 70 years, a broken woman watching her world crumble around the consequences of her own corruption. Then her mask snapped back into place, and she turned toward the exit with her head held high. "Detective Cooper," she said formally, "I'll be filing a complaint about this harassment." "You're welcome to try," Cooper replied, "but I'd recommend focusing on your own legal problems instead." As Patricia Morrison left Romano's Steakhouse for the last time, the restaurant erupted in applause. Becca felt tears streaming down her face, not tears of fear or shame, but tears of relief and triumph. "It's really over now, isn't it?" she asked Sarah Beth. "The criminal cases, yes. The custody threats, yes. But Becca, you've done something much more important than just winning legal battles." "What's that?" Sarah Beth gestured to the restaurant full of people who were still applauding, many of them pulling out phones to share what they'd witnessed on social media. "You've shown other women that it's possible to fight back and win. That abuse doesn't have to be endured in silence. That powerful men and their enablers can be held accountable for their actions." Tommy approached their table with champagne glasses filled with sparkling cider. "Ladies, gentlemen, and especially Miss Hope," he said formally, "a toast to justice served and courage rewarded." Around the restaurant, other diners raised their glasses in solidarity. Becca looked at the faces surrounding her: Tommy and his staff, Detective Cooper and his officers, Sarah Beth and her legal team, and most importantly, Danny, who had risked everything to protect his sister and niece. But the face she focused on most was Hope's, bright-eyed, curious, completely secure in her mother's arms. This little girl would never know the fear that had defined her mother's marriage. She would grow up surrounded by people who had fought for justice and won. "To new beginnings," Becca said, raising her glass. "To new beginnings," the restaurant chorused. Outside, Patricia Morrison climbed into a black sedan and disappeared into traffic, carrying with her the last remnants of the Thornfield family's power to hurt innocent people. Inside Romano's Steakhouse, Hope gurgled happily in her mother's arms, ready to face a future full of possibility instead of fear. The nightmare was finally, truly over. The real life could begin. 1 year later, Becca stood in the same federal courthouse where Rick had been sentenced. But today she was there as an advocate, not a victim. The hearing room was packed with women who had found the courage to come forward after seeing Becca's story in the media. Wives of Rick's business associates, former clients of Patricia Morrison's corrupt court, and abuse survivors who had been inspired by one woman's refusal to stay silent. "The court recognizes Rebecca Sullivan Thornfield," Judge Martinez announced. Becca approached the podium with Hope on her hip, now a toddler with her mother's dark hair and her uncle's determined chin. The little girl looked around the courtroom with fearless curiosity, occasionally waving at the gallery full of supporters. "Your Honor," Becca began, "I'm here today to speak on behalf of the victims of Patricia Morrison's corruption and to request that the court consider the full scope of damage caused by her abuse of judicial power." Over the past year, the investigation into Patricia Morrison's crimes had uncovered a conspiracy that reached far beyond protecting her son. More than 200 cases had been identified where Morrison had accepted bribes, manipulated custody decisions, or perverted justice to benefit wealthy donors and political allies. "Mrs. Sullivan Thornfield," Judge Martinez said gently, "please tell the court how Patricia Morrison's actions affected you and your daughter." She threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent and steal my baby," Becca said simply. "She used her position as a former judge to terrorize an abuse victim into staying with her abuser. She told me that no court would ever believe me over her son and that I would spend the rest of my life in a psychiatric facility if I tried to leave him." A murmur ran through the gallery. Even knowing the facts of the case, hearing them spoken aloud still had the power to shock. "But Your Honor, I'm not here just to recount my own suffering. I'm here to speak for the dozens of women who weren't as fortunate as I was. The mothers who lost their children because they couldn't afford lawyers as good as Morrison's cronies. The abuse victims who were forced to give their children to their abusers because Morrison had been bribed to ignore evidence of domestic violence." Becca looked directly at Patricia Morrison, who sat at the defense table looking every one of her 70 years. The former judge had aged rapidly during her year in custody, her iron composure replaced by the fragility of someone facing the consequences of a lifetime of corruption. Patricia Morrison didn't just break the law, Becca continued. She broke faith with every woman who trusted the family court system to protect her children. She weaponized her judicial power to serve her own interests, while innocent children were placed in dangerous homes and vulnerable women were denied justice. Hope chose that moment to babble loudly, reaching toward the gallery where Danny sat in his dress uniform. Several spectators smiled at the interruption, and Judge Martinez himself seemed charmed by the child's fearless demeanor. Your Honor, Becca said, adjusting Hope on her hip. This little girl will grow up in a world where Patricia Morrison can never again use a judge's robe to terrorize families. That's justice. But the women who suffered under Morrison's corruption for decades, they deserve more than just her conviction. They deserve to know that their pain led to reforms that will protect other families. Judge Martinez nodded gravely. Mrs. Sullivan Thornfield, can you tell the court about the foundation you've established? The Hope Foundation provides legal aid to domestic violence survivors navigating family court, Becca replied. We've partnered with the State Bar Association to train attorneys in recognizing judicial corruption, and we've lobbied successfully for legislation requiring transparency in family court financial disclosures. What Becca didn't mention was that the foundation had been funded largely by the settlement from Rick's company and donations from military families whose loved ones had been killed by defective equipment. Justice had become circular. Rick's crimes had provided the resources to help his victims and prevent future tragedies. We've also established partnerships with medical professionals to improve reporting of domestic violence, and with law enforcement to ensure that abuse allegations are investigated thoroughly, regardless of the perpetrator's wealth or connections. Sarah Beth, now the foundation's legal director, had turned down more lucrative offers to focus on systemic reform. Her work had already led to the overturning of dozens of Morrison's corrupt rulings and the reunion of families that had been torn apart by judicial misconduct. Your Honor, Becca concluded, I ask the court to sentence Patricia Morrison to the maximum penalty allowed by law, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. Her crimes weren't committed in a moment of passion or desperation. They were the product of decades of systematic corruption that treated vulnerable families as pawns in a game of power and profit. When Patricia Morrison was finally sentenced to 15 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, the courtroom erupted in applause. But Becca felt no joy in the old woman's downfall, only relief that her power to hurt innocent people had finally been broken. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited with cameras and questions. A year ago, Becca would have hidden from such attention. Now she faced it with the confidence of someone who had learned to use her voice as a weapon against injustice. Mrs. Sullivan Thornfield, how does it feel to see Patricia Morrison sentenced? It feels like justice, Becca replied simply. Not just for me and Hope, but for all the families whose lives she destroyed over the years. What's next for the Hope Foundation? We're expanding nationwide, Sarah Beth answered, stepping up beside her friend and client. There are corrupt judges and abusive systems in every state, and there are women who need our help in every community. Mrs. Sullivan Thornfield, do you have any regrets about going public with your story? Becca looked down at Hope, who was trying to grab a reporter's microphone with determined toddler hands. My only regret is that I stayed silent for so long, she said. Every woman who suffers in silence because she's afraid no one will believe her, every child who grows up in an abusive home because the system failed to protect them, they all deserve better than my fear. A reporter pressed closer. There are rumors that your ex-husband is appealing his conviction. Are you concerned about his eventual release? Rick Thornfield will serve at least 15 years in federal prison, Becca replied calmly. When he gets out, he'll be a registered sex offender with no parental rights and no access to government contracts. His power to hurt people has been permanently broken. What she didn't say was that Rick had tried multiple appeals, all of which had been rejected by higher courts. His co-conspirator Margaret Crawford had testified against him in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing additional evidence that made his conviction absolutely solid. The man who had once seemed untouchable was now just another federal prisoner, counting down the years until his release into obscurity. Mrs. Sullivan Thornfield, what would you say to other women who are currently in abusive relationships? Becca paused, thinking of all the women who had contacted the foundation since her story became public. Women trapped in marriages like hers had been, women afraid to leave because they couldn't imagine surviving without their abuser's financial support. I would tell them that asking for help isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing you can do, she said finally. I would tell them that there are people who will believe them, support them, and fight alongside them. And I would tell them that their children deserve to see their mother choose courage over fear. Hope babbled again, this time reaching toward Danny, who had been standing quietly behind the reporters. Becca handed her daughter to her brother, and the sight of the decorated Marine gently holding his niece provided the perfect ending to the media event. As the reporters dispersed and the crowd began to thin, Becca found herself alone with her thoughts for the first time all day. 2 years ago, she had been a terrified pregnant woman, trapped in an abusive marriage, convinced that she was powerless to change her circumstances. Today, she was the founder of a national organization, helping other women escape similar situations. Penny for your thoughts, Danny said, approaching with Hope still in his arms. Just thinking about how different everything is, Becca replied. 2 years ago, I couldn't imagine life without Rick. Now I can't imagine why I ever thought I needed him. You were surviving, Sarah Beth observed, joining them on the courthouse steps. There's no shame in doing whatever it takes to survive until you're strong enough to fight. Hope reached for her mother and Becca took her daughter back with the automatic ease of single parenthood. The little girl was thriving, healthy, happy, surrounded by people who adored her and would protect her from any threat. What's next? Danny asked. The foundation is established. The bad guys are in prison. Hope is healthy and happy. What does Rebecca Sullivan Thornfield do for an encore? Becca smiled, looking out at the city that had become her home in ways it never was when she lived in Rick's penthouse prison. I think, she said slowly, it's time to start living instead of just surviving. The afternoon sun painted the courthouse steps in shades of gold, and for the first time since her wedding day, Becca looked toward the future with nothing but excitement for what it might bring. 2 years after Patricia Morrison's sentencing, Becca stood in the kitchen of her modest downtown apartment, preparing breakfast while Hope played with blocks on the living room floor. Through the windows, she could see the city waking up, commuters hurrying to work, joggers heading to the park, delivery trucks navigating the morning traffic. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning, and Becca had never been happier. "Mama, up!" Hope called, raising her arms with the imperious demand of a 2-year-old who ruled her small world with iron determination. "Almost done, sweetheart," Becca replied, flipping pancakes while simultaneously checking emails on her phone. The Hope Foundation had grown beyond her wildest dreams, now operating in 12 states with a staff of 30 attorneys and advocates. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Beth. "Morning News wants to interview you about the Morrison documentary. Interested?" The documentary about judicial corruption had premiered the previous month, featuring extensive interviews with Patricia Morrison's victims and the law enforcement officials who had brought her down. Rick appeared only in news footage and court records. He had refused all interview requests from his federal prison cell. Becca typed back, "Maybe. Let me think about it." The truth was, she was tired of being defined by her past trauma. The foundation was successful and self-sustaining, Hope was thriving, and Becca had started dating someone, a fellow teacher named Michael who treated her daughter like his own and never asked probing questions about her famous ex-husband. "Danny coming today?" Hope asked, having mastered the art of conversation even if her grammar remained charmingly imperfect. "Uncle Danny is coming for lunch," Becca confirmed, scooping her daughter into her arms for the ritual morning cuddle. "And Aunt Sarah is coming for dinner." Hope clapped her hands with delight. Her extended family of choice had given her something Becca had never experienced: absolute security in the knowledge that she was loved and protected by multiple adults who would move heaven and earth to keep her safe. The doorbell rang, interrupting breakfast preparations. Becca glanced at the security monitor Danny had insisted on installing and saw a young woman standing nervously on her doorstep, clutching a manila envelope. "Can I help you?" Becca asked through the intercom. "Mrs. Sullivan Thornfield? My name is Jessica Chen. I need help. The Hope Foundation gave me your address." Becca's heart clenched with familiar recognition. The woman looked exactly like she had 3 years ago, frightened, desperate, trying to appear composed while her world fell apart behind her eyes. "Come up," Becca said immediately, buzzing her in. "Hope, can you play with your blocks for a few minutes while Mama talks to a friend?" Jessica Chen looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her clothes were expensive but wrinkled, her makeup carefully applied, but unable to hide the bruises around her throat. She carried herself with the particular tension of someone always expecting attack. "I'm sorry to bother you at home," Jessica began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the foundation said you might understand." "I understand," Becca said simply, guiding her to the couch. "Tell me what's happening." The story that emerged was heartbreakingly familiar. A wealthy husband who had started with criticism and isolation, progressed to financial control and psychological abuse, and recently escalated to physical violence. Jessica was pregnant with their first child and terrified of what would happen when the baby was born. "He says no court would give custody to an unemployed woman with no resources," Jessica whispered. "He says his family has connections that would ensure I never see my child again." "Where have I heard that before?" Becca said grimly. "Jessica, let me ask you something. Do you want to leave him?" "I don't know how. He controls all the money, monitors my phone, has investigators watching me. I only got here today because he thinks I'm at a prenatal appointment." Becca felt the familiar surge of protective anger that had driven her to establish the foundation in the first place. Every woman who walked through her door was herself 3 years ago, trapped in the same cycle of fear and isolation. "Jessica, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are not powerless. You are not alone. And you are not going to lose your baby to an abuser." Hope looked up from her blocks and toddled over to the couch, apparently sensing that the visitor needed comfort. With the fearless compassion of childhood, she climbed into Jessica's lap and patted her tear-stained cheek. "Sad?" Hope asked with 2-year-old directness. "A little sad," Jessica admitted, managing a watery smile, "but feeling better now." "Hope make it better," the toddler announced with absolute confidence, and Jessica actually laughed. "She's beautiful," Jessica said to Becca. "How old?" 2.5. "And yes, she's the reason I fought back against her father and won." Over the next hour, Becca walked Jessica through the same process Sarah Beth had used with her: documenting abuse, securing evidence, building a network of support. The Hope Foundation had refined the process based on hundreds of cases, creating a systematic approach to helping women escape even the most controlling relationships. "The first step is getting you somewhere safe," Becca explained. "We have secure housing arrangements that your husband can't trace through private investigators. The second step is documenting everything: medical records, financial records, evidence of abuse and threats. Akram, but he has so many resources, so many connections." "So do we," Becca said firmly. "Jessica, in the past 3 years, we've helped over 500 women leave abusive relationships. Some of their husbands were police officers, judges, politicians, millionaires. Abuse is about power and control, not just money." Hope had fallen asleep in Jessica's lap, her small body radiating the absolute trust that came from never having experienced fear in her own home. "She's never known what it's like to be afraid, has she?" Jessica asked, stroking Hope's dark hair. "Never," Becca confirmed. "She's growing up surrounded by people who would die before letting anyone hurt her. Your baby can have the same security." "How do you know? How can you be sure?" Becca smiled, thinking of all the women who had asked her the same question over the years. "Because 3 years ago, I was sitting where you are now, pregnant, terrified, convinced I was powerless against a man who controlled everything. Today, that man is in federal prison, his mother is in federal prison, and their power to hurt people has been completely destroyed." Jessica's eyes widened. "You're talking about Richard Thornfield, the defense contractor who was convicted of fraud." "My ex-husband," Becca confirmed, "Hope's biological father, though she'll never know him as anything other than a cautionary tale about what happens when powerful men face real consequences. I followed that case in the news. I never realized—" Jessica looked around the modest apartment, taking in the children's toys, the law school textbooks on the coffee table, the photos of Hope with Danny and Sarah Beth, and the extended family of choice they had built together. "You're in law school?" Night classes, Becca explained. I want to understand the system that failed me so I can help fix it for other women. I'll graduate next year and hopefully join Sarah Beth's firm as a full partner in the foundation. Hope stirred in Jessica's lap, opening sleepy eyes and smiling at the stranger who had been holding her. Mama, she said clearly, new friend to stay for pancakes? Would you like to stay for breakfast? Becca asked Jessica. I make excellent pancakes, and Hope could use the company. I should get back. He'll be suspicious if I'm gone too long. Jessica, here's what's going to happen. You're going to eat breakfast with us. Then you're going to call the Foundation's emergency hotline and speak to our intake coordinator. Tonight, if you choose, you'll be sleeping somewhere your husband can't find you, with legal protection and financial resources to start building a new life. It can't be that simple. It's not simple, Becca admitted. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do. But it's possible, and you don't have to do it alone. Jessica looked at Hope, who was now fully awake and demanding pancakes now, with the single-minded focus of a toddler who had spotted breakfast. Okay, Jessica said quietly. Okay, yes, I want to try. As Becca prepared breakfast for three, she felt the familiar satisfaction of seeing fear transform into hope. Every woman who walked through her door was a reminder of why the work mattered, why the foundation existed, why her own suffering had been transformed into purpose. Her phone buzzed with another text from Sarah Beth. Saw the news van outside your building. Everything okay? Becca glanced out the window and saw that reporters had indeed gathered on the street below, probably following up on some anniversary of Rick's conviction or Patricia Morrison's sentencing. The media attention had been both blessing and curse. It brought awareness to domestic violence issues, but also kept her past trauma in the public eye. She typed back, everything's perfect. Just helping another sister find her way home. Through the kitchen window, the city continued its daily rhythm of life and commerce, unaware that in one small apartment, another woman was discovering that escape was possible, that justice was real, and that the future could be different from the past. Hope chattered happily as she ate her pancakes, regaling Jessica with a detailed account of her upcoming visit with Uncle Danny and the elaborate plans they had made for an afternoon at the zoo. Jessica listened with the wonder of someone imagining a world where children felt safe enough to make plans and count on the adults in their lives to keep promises. Mrs. Sullivan Thornfield, Jessica said as breakfast concluded, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever regret speaking up? Do you ever wish you had found a quieter way to leave? Becca considered the question seriously. Her public battle with Rick and Patricia Morrison had cost her privacy, subjected her to media scrutiny, and made her a symbol whether she wanted to be one or not. There are days when I wish Hope and I could live completely anonymous lives, she admitted, when I'm tired of being the poster child for domestic violence survivors or frustrated with reporters who want to rehash the same story over and over. But then women like you knock on my door, and I remember why I chose to fight publicly instead of just personally. If my story helps one woman realize she's not powerless, if it helps one child grow up safe from an abuser, then every minute of public attention was worth it. Jessica nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. You turned your pain into power. We all did, Becca corrected. Sarah Beth could have stayed in corporate law, making 3 times her foundation salary. Danny could have stayed overseas, where military life was simpler. Dr. Porter could have minded her own business instead of documenting my injuries. Tommy could have stayed out of his customers' personal drama. But they didn't. No, they didn't. And now Hope grows up surrounded by people who chose justice over comfort, who chose courage over convenience. Becca looked at her daughter, who was industriously stacking blocks while humming off-key songs of her own invention. That's the real victory. Not that we destroyed our enemies, but that we built something better. Jessica's phone rang, and she flinched automatically before checking the caller ID. It's him, she whispered, fear flooding back into her expression. Answer it, Becca said calmly. Tell him your appointment is running late. Normal voice, no stress. You're safe here. Jessica took the call with surprising composure, explaining to her husband that the doctor was behind schedule and she would be home within the hour. When she hung up, her hands were shaking, but her voice had been steady. Good, Becca said approvingly. You're stronger than you know. I don't feel strong. Neither did I. Strength isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite fear. You came here today despite being terrified. You're considering leaving despite having no guarantee of what comes next. That's not weakness, Jessica. That's courage. Hope finished her block's construction, a wobbly tower that defied architectural logic but stood nonetheless, and clapped her hands with pride. Strong, she announced, apparently commenting on her building skills but somehow capturing the entire morning's theme. Yes, sweetheart, Becca agreed, scooping her daughter into her arms. Very strong. Jessica gathered her purse and the manila envelope full of foundation resources Becca had given her. At the door, she turned back with tears in her eyes. Thank you. For breakfast. For listening. For showing me that escape is possible. Thank you for being brave enough to ask for help, Becca replied. That's the hardest part. After Jessica left, Becca stood at her window watching the reporters below pack up their equipment and disperse. Another news cycle about her past was ending, but the real work continued in private conversations, legal documents, and the daily choice to turn trauma into purpose. Hope tugged at her mother's shirt. Mama? Uncle Danny soon? Soon, baby girl. Very soon. Outside, the city hummed with the energy of millions of people pursuing their dreams, fighting their battles and building their own versions of hope. Among them, Jessica Chen was driving home to a husband who didn't know his power was about to be challenged. In federal prison, Rick Thornfield was serving another day of a sentence that would keep him away from innocent people for years to come. And in a modest apartment filled with children's laughter and law school textbooks, a woman who had once been powerless was helping others discover their own strength. The nightmare was over. The real life, messy, complicated, beautiful, and free, continued. Hope's future stretched ahead, unlimited by fear, unbounded by the sins of her father, anchored by the love of people who had chosen courage when it mattered most. And that, Becca realized, was the only victory that truly mattered.